mountains today, and someone told me, fortunately, it hasn't been one of those weeks. Apparently, when Dwight Nelson was here, he didn't get to see any of your mountains, but that was when there was smoke all in the area. But fortunately, there's no smoke, there's fresh air, beautiful sunshine. I actually got to eat outside today at lunch, and have very much enjoyed being here. And it's not too hot yet. I know it's supposed to get a little hotter, but yeah, I think I've been to this camp meeting 4 or 5 times, and this is the coolest it's been since for the years I've been here. Well, today we're going to be talking about something critically important for all of us, and that is our memory. And so, is there things that we can do to prevent memory loss? Are there things that we can do to enhance our memories? And so we'll learn a few things about that today. So before we begin, let's bow our heads and ask God to be with us during this session. Father in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity to learn more about our brains, and particularly the areas of the brain that have to do with memory and how we might be able to enhance these areas. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. So the title of this presentation is Dementia, Causes, Prevention, and Treatment. And this is increasing greatly in our society today. In fact, it's even known to occur in people as young as 20 or 30, as you'll see. This is a very rapidly rising cause of dementia, but our objectives today are listed on the screen to classify the 4 most common causes of memory loss today and how they have changed over time. We'll also learn how diagnosing dementia early can halt the progression of disease. This is very key for us to be able to catch it early. There are some permanent changes that start to be made if it's not caught on too early. And of course, in fact, I would say in today's society, grandparents are neglected more so than they have in previous societies. And not only because the kids are busy, but the grandkids that used to associate with the grandparents a lot are busy on their devices, and they'd rather be with their devices than with their parents and grandparents. And so often grandparents are neglected, and as their memory starts to decline, no one notices it until it gets really severe. And by then, some terrible permanent changes can take place. We need to understand the influence of dietary components on metabolites produced by microbes as well that can have a role to play. Explain the risk factors for the development of all 4 causes of dementia and how to avoid them, how to avoid the risk factors that can cause them, and manage and improve dementia through specific proven therapies. And it is true, even though there are some permanent changes, dementia can still improve to at least some extent by incorporating some of the things we now know that can be helpful. So I know U.S. mirrors Canada quite a bit, but I can give you the U.S. dementia stats. Over 6.7 million Americans have it. That's, of course, a lot. Over 14 million will have it by 2043, and it's now the 6th leading cause of death in America. You know, when I published our book, Proof Positive, back before the turn of the century, right before the turn of the century, dementia was not even in the top 15 causes of death. And so it was a very unusual cause of death, and it's one of the reasons why I didn't include it, as far as the major cause of death, which we, list in Proof Positive. By the way, we're coming out with a new edition this next year of Proof Positive that's all updated with all of those diseases of the internal organs and major cause of death and how we can prevent it. To put this in perspective, there are more deaths from dementia than breast and prostate cancer combined. Breast cancer, of course, is a leading cause of death in females. It's actually the leading cancer causing death. And if you just take a look at females, and if you just take a look at males, prostate is up there number one. But if you take a look at both of those, breast and prostate cancer, there are more deaths from dementia. And so there's a lot of focus on those two cancers and how we can prevent them as well as treat them, but not a lot is talked about in regards to this even more important cause of death. Now, I should mention lung cancer is going to be listed as number one for both genders. And so, because lung cancer can occur in both men and women. So lung cancer is going to outdo breast and prostate, but when you divide it up, dementia is more than those two. In America, one person every 60 seconds is newly diagnosed with the disease. So every minute, someone is seeing a doctor and the sad news comes out. You've got a permanent, irreversible dementia. In seniors, 1 out of 3 deaths is currently from dementia. So if you're fortunate enough to live to age 65, chances are you're not going to die from a physical disease. Or at least 1 out of 3 chance, it will be a disease of the brain, which of course dementia is. 16 million Americans provide unpaid care for people with dementia. Dementia costs money. It costs the families money. And to be put in a memory care unit is a lot of money. And so there are individuals that, of course, are paid and make their living taking care of people that can no longer take care of themselves because of their dementia. But their families want them to be taken care of humanely, as they well should, and so it's not cheap. And so $345 billion were spent on the disease last time we checked, which was last year. And they had the 2022 data. I don't think the 2023 data has come out yet. But this is a lot of money being spent on dementia. So what is dementia? It's loss of memory severe enough that it impacts a person's ability to carry out work, school, or daily activities. One of the reasons why it's underdiagnosed in the elderly is if they've retired, they're not working anymore. If they're not working, they're not around people that even notice that there's memory loss. And if they're just at home, they can still figure out what rooms they're going to if they've been there a long time. But if you put that person in another home, they might get lost in it because even though you show them where things are at, they're not familiar with it. And so daily activities do start to slide even in a home environment. So how common is it? As I mentioned, if you live to age 65, 1 out of 3 chance you're going to die from dementia instead of a physical disease. But if you're over 65, it's a 1 out of 8 chance you already have it. And as I look over this audience today, I see that many are over the age of 65, and so we might be speaking to some of you who already have this, at least in an early enough stage. If you are late stage, I don't think they'd take you out of a memory care unit to come watch this lecture, but maybe someone was wise enough to do that and bring you over here. I don't know. But 1 out of 8 has dementia. But if you live to age 85, it now goes up to 1 out of 2. So 50% chance, if you're over 85, you already have dementia. So because this is so common today, there is a false idea that this is just a part of life. There's even a term, there's a medical terminology called age-related cognitive decline. And that actually is a false term. Yes, there is a diagnosis called that. Age-related cognitive decline is kind of more of the early dementia, it's not really late dementia, and so sometimes early dementia is called that. But dementia should never be considered a normal part of aging. Now, that's different than our physical bodies. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. There are things that will decline physically when you age. It's just a part of life. And there's nothing we can do to necessarily prevent all of that. We might be able to delay it some, but we're never going to be able to prevent it. But not true in regards to the mind. And I can give you an example of a good friend of mine, Dr. John Scharfenberg. In fact, where are the Stankies? That's another person you could get here next year. I mean, that would be a real hit to get John Scharfenberg here. John Scharfenberg was born in 1923 in Shanghai, China. He is going to be turning 101 this year, and he still walks on his own power. No cane, no walker. He drives himself, and he actually drives at normal speeds. He'll even pass people on the highway on his red sports car. He doesn't live too far away from me in Weimar, California there. And he travels the world all by himself. Just last week, he spoke in Madagascar to a stadium full of 50,000 people. What is he telling them? He's telling them how you can age gracefully and not experience dementia. And his mind is sharp. He will remember what people told him 2 hours ago, 1 hour ago, 10 minutes ago. He'll remember everything from yesterday, and he remembers everything from 95 years ago, too. And so his short-term memory is sharp. He still has a sense of humor. He'll, if you get him here to speak at the camp meeting, he will stand up and he will have a great sense of humor, and he'll actually laugh at his own jokes. And it's really funny to watch a 101-year-old man just break out into a full smile and laugh and be a full part of life. So he's a physician, but he's also a nutritionist, Harvard-trained nutritionist, and he will tell you his secrets. I'll tell you a few of his secrets too during this lecture. But the point is that if age was going to decline everyone's memory, like it does their muscles, etc., you know, there's a reason why we don't see 95-year-olds playing Major League Baseball. You know, even John Scharfenberg, he's not going to get out there in the baseball field and you know, play football, hockey, baseball, those sorts of things. You won't see 95-year-old men doing those sorts of things as far as professional level or things like that. They still, you know, he can still walk on his own power. In fact, I was at the alumni meeting at Loma Linda University. You know, he graduated many, many years ago, and it took him this long to make him alumnus, an honored alumni of Loma Linda University. But I was there when they were talking about all the things that he's accomplished in his life, and you have to go up this big gangplank to receive your reward, and he's over there just hopping up there, 100 years of age, to get his, his alumnus of the year from Loma Linda University. But the point is, we should not consider that you will lose your mind and memory just as a result of aging. There's got to be other things going on. So dementia, however, is not only memory loss. It starts out with memory loss, but as it progresses, changes in personality develop. There's behavioral and psychological changes that can also develop. A person can start having, you know, psychological diagnosis that never used to have issues with their emotions. Then, of course, as it progresses, you can get into anger. Even frequent cursing can occur in individuals who never used to curse. And they were always, you know, managed, and they could manage themselves. But now, at the drop of a hat, they can get angry. Increase in irritability will also occur. You know, I was taking care, speaking of what can happen sometimes in these memory care units, is I saw this elderly man who had started to lose his memory and he was starting to get into anger, but he had developed a romantic attraction to another woman who had a memory issue and was in the memory care unit. By the way, you know, one of these things, I kind of began to understand it when I was 18 years old, working in a nursing home, and I actually was taking care of a 100-year-old woman who, when I walked in the nursing home place to take care of her the way the nurse had told me to, she was immediately had sex on her brain and started talking to me about sexual things, and I was alarmed. 100-year-old woman, and I'm an 18-year-old young man, and she's sitting there talking to me about sex. I went out of there with big, giant eyes, and I told the nurses, and I thought they would be shocked, and they just laughed. They just thought it was a great, humorous thing, and they said, "Oh, that's Gladys. Gladys, yeah, Gladys is going to be this way," and all of that sort of thing. So what I've realized from that point onward is no matter how old you get, sex is still on the brain. It's a part of humanity, and a lot of the younger people think that the old people really don't know what they're doing when it comes to that sort of thing, and it's not true. But anyways, he had this attraction to this woman, and it turns out she had an attraction to him. And so he was very angry and upset when he came to me because the memory care staff would not let them sleep together in this nursing home memory care unit. And, you know, I had to try to explain and reason to him the best I could with a demented man, but I wasn't getting anywhere. And he was extremely angry. He was wanting out of that nursing home. And of course, I thought, you know, does the family know about this? So I called the family. And, you know, he's saying that he needs out of there and for all of this reason. And of course, she needs out of there too. In fact, he was going to take her and him out of there, and they were going to go live by themselves in a home where they couldn't be bothered by, by the nursing home staff. Well, it didn't work out so well. I think she died about 4 weeks later, and he died about 6 weeks later, both progressive on their dementia. But increases in irritability can occur. Loss of ability to retain urine and stool will eventually advance, and this is where this all leads to. If we look at the worldwide dementia stats, 55 million people currently are living with dementia. 82 million will have it by 2030, and will more than double by 2040 to 139 million people worldwide. And a new case is diagnosed of dementia throughout the world every 3 seconds. So this isn't just a problem with the US and Canada. In the US, 1.3 trillion, that's 1,313 billion, for 55.2 million people with dementia in 2019, corresponding to US $23,796 per person with dementia. So that's about how much you're going to spend, at least in 2019, per person when we average it all together. Some will, of course, cost a lot more than that. So let's get to the 4 common causes of dementia. The one that's probably gotten the most press is Alzheimer's dementia. This is where we get the plaques, where the memory portions of the brain have just become fibrosed, and there's these big, giant amyloid plaques. Then there's vascular dementia. Vascular dementia is often thought of to be Alzheimer's, but it's not Alzheimer's. It's due to blood vessel disease, and often it's the small blood vessels that are involved. And so we see vascular dementia almost as common, and this is caused by atherosclerosis the cholesterol plaques, the oxidized cholesterol getting in there. And of course, there's certain risk factors. All the risk factors for atherosclerosis would also be risk factors for vascular dementia. So one of the things we can do when we get on a good, healthy diet is we're not only preventing our heart from developing coronary artery disease and our brains from developing stroke, but we're also preventing this very common cause of dementia. Then the third most common now, and this one you won't hear about often from neurologists yet. What is it called? Digital dementia. Now, I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, I think, when we talked about the electronics. And what's happening with the electronics is we are diminishing our working memory. The working memory is in the front portion of the brain, the anterior cingulate gyrus. We'll get into that here in a little bit. And then the fourth most common is not a primary dementia, but it's a dementia due to mental illness. The mental illness that produces dementia, and a diagnosis of dementia most commonly, is major clinical depression. And fortunately, this dementia can get better with treatment. If we don't have the plaques, if it's not Alzheimer's, if we don't have the vascular disease, but it can be a significant dementia. We had a person in our last program this way, but it takes more time for them to significantly improve. She's already improving. But we had a woman, it was pretty dramatic about 3 years ago. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia, and she was only in her 50s. And you can have early onset Alzheimer's dementia in your 50s. So the neurologist had diagnosed her that way. She couldn't work anymore. And when her daughter, who had found out about our program, called us, and we started to look at the genesis of how this started and what was going on in her life, and of course there were some significant hits that occurred that caused her major depression. And so we thought, there's a pretty good chance this may not be Alzheimer's or vascular dementia. It might be actually dementia from depression. We had to lead her to her room. We had to show her her room multiple times. She could not find her room. Her dementia was so bad. We had to guide her to each of her appointments. But by the end of the program, she was able to find her room. And of course, we thought, well, maybe she's just getting used to it, 10 days. But within 20 weeks of that program, her memory had fully recovered. And she was back to work. And everyone was amazed, her family and everyone else. Why? We had treated the underlying cause of her dementia, which was depression. And her underlying cause of depression, once it was treated, then the dementia significantly improved. So, and of course, depression among the elderly is even more common than those in the middle age. And so this is an important factor to consider, is could your relative that's suffering dementia, or could it actually be a biochemical issue related to the depression? So the World Health Organization has set goals for dementia. Their goal is to have us diagnose cases early in the process when we can do something about it. Their goal is to optimize physical health, cognitive activity, and well-being, which could help the condition as well as help prevent it, detect and treat behavioral and psychological symptoms, and then provide information and long-term support to caregivers. So that's the WHO goals. So let's get into the first one of those goals, and that is early dementia. What physicians commonly use in their office to diagnose this is called a mini mental status exam. And let me just tell you, that exam will not catch early dementia. It won't catch even moderate dementia. It will only catch late onset advanced dementia. And so when the doctor gives you a mini mental status exam and has you subtract 7 from 100, and then once you give him an answer of 93, and then he's asking you to subtract 7 from that, and he's going through, it's a 30-point test, he's going through all of that, he's giving you a mini mental status exam. And if you don't do well on that exam, the cat is out of the bag. This is late onset if he's telling you that you did poorly on that exam. So we have to come up with a different exam for detecting early dementia. And the test that we recommend that we run in our clinic is called the MCI memory test. And this is a memory test that will catch early dementia. In fact, most people are surprised that they have memory loss when they take it, because early dementia they often don't figure out themselves. Now, we have people that are very worried about their memory, but in general, when we test them, they're actually pretty good. And maybe there are some things that they could do to improve their memory, but they're not to the dementia or even early dementia stage. But for those who actually have dementia, in general, they're not worried about their memory. They will do things to cover it, and they're pretty good at trying to cover their issues in regards to memory, but you give them a test like that, and it can be pretty surprising in regards to how poor their memory actually is. And this tests the memory, whether the information is getting into the brain, and if it is getting in, whether you have a retrieval problem. And so it can characterize even the type of memory loss and what can be done about it. It does cost more. Your mini mental status exam is just included in your physician visit. There's no extra charge for that. But for the MCI memory test, because it's a patented test and because it requires a tester who is certified to do the testing to do this, it's going to cost you an extra $95 at least in the United States. And I don't know, I haven't talked about a physician if it is available in Canada. I would think since it's a $95 extra charge, you probably have to come to the United States to figure out if you have early dementia or not, but maybe not. Working memory resides in the frontal lobe and lasts less than a minute. So this is a very important part of our brain to be able to have a very good memory. So when you are learning something that's important, it's going to stay in your working memory for a minute or less. This form of memory is commonly referred to as your attention span. And working memory will last up to 1 minute before being erased. So if it is not put into the temporal lobe, it's going to end up being erased. And so we want to have that connection where it goes from working memory to short-term memory. So short-term memory is not working memory. This isn't the anterior cingulate gyrus of the frontal lobe at all. This resides in the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is right there behind your ear and lasts between a few minutes and a few weeks. An area of the inside or medial part of the temporal lobe, the hippocampus, activates the brain areas that represent the memory so that the individual may actually retrieve it. So it's put in there for a few days to a few weeks so that it can be retrieved. But not all of one's moment-to-moment experience activate hippocampal short-term memory. Only those experiences that are novel, interesting, or those that one intended to remember will sufficiently stimulate nerve cells in the working memory. And of course, this is a good thing. If as you're sitting here today, there's a lot of information going into your brain, not just what I'm giving you, but if you think about it, there is the amount of pressure on your feet. If your left foot is on the floor or your right foot, even your gluteus maximus pressure, and maybe you're getting more pressure on the left side than on the right side. You may be folding your hands, and so you've got that pressure. And then, of course, there's all sorts of audio information that are not coming from here, that are coming from the lawn or from the kids. And, of course, there's information in regards to how much light. So there's all of this information your brain is able to process. But after this lecture, you won't even remember whether you're folding your hands or not, or whether your left foot was down or your right foot or all of that. It's not important. Now you might remember it if you have a severe pain all of a sudden in that left foot in the middle of the lecture, and it's enough to really bring it to your attention, and then you might remember, Dr. Nedley was talking about this, and then I got this severe pain. But all of that information otherwise is not going to be implanted into your short-term memory, which is, of course, a good thing. So only those experiences, once again, that are novel, meaning that it's new information, it's interesting, or those that one intended to remember, will sufficiently stimulate nerve cells in the working memory. Then it can go to long-term memory. Long-term memory lasts how long? A lifetime. Long-term memories are stored in the brain, but there can be some difficulty in retrieving it. Now, let me give you an example of this. I took some piano lessons growing up, and I learned some pieces by memory. One of those pieces I remembered was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. And it was probably 30 years since I played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. But last year I sat down, and the first measure I could remember, I started playing it, started listening to it, and then I couldn't go further. Then I thought about it a little more, and I started again. All of a sudden, measure 2, measure 3 came, measure 4. I was done. Couldn't remember. I didn't have the sheet music in front of me, I was just playing on a blank piano. And then I stopped, gave it a little time, and I restarted. Every time I restarted, I could play more and more of Moonlight Sonata. And after sitting there for about 30 minutes, I finished the entire piece by memory without looking at any music. So what was happening? That memory was stored. It was stored in my long-term memory, but I was having difficulty in what? Difficulty in retrieving it. But as I was producing some activity on that portion of the brain that remembered it, better circulation was coming in there, and then all of a sudden I could get a little better retrieval, and my brain was working towards retrieving that aspect of things. And eventually it came out. And so it's not that the long-term memory was forgotten. I played that enough to memorize it. And if you memorized, played a piece to memorize it, it is in your brain. The issue could be on the retrieval part of it. So once mild cognitive impairment is diagnosed, it's actually time to begin an individualized workup. When we find out that MCI memory test is subpar, and you've lost some things, and maybe it's not to the point of permanent irreversible dementia, but it's still lower than what you should be or what you used to be, it's time for an individualized workup. And a personalized treatment plan can then be developed, arresting the progression of the disease. Whatever has caused it to be mildly cognitively impaired, we want to stop doing those things or start doing things that are not helping our brain. And it can actually reverse rather readily if we don't have those plaques or permanent vascular changes occurring. And so improving the memory is very possible in anyone with dementia, but particularly if it's early on, it can be totally reversed and your brain can actually get to where it used to be. So intelligence is our ability to learn, retain, and what else? Apply knowledge. And this is something that we get this idea that this is going to decrease with age. But once again, this isn't true if our brains are working the way we should. And as you age, and I can imagine many of you have noticed this, physically, you will slow down. Your strength will wane. Now, I know when I was younger and I started to do strength training exercises or sports type exercises, I could get significantly better. My muscles could grow quickly. But what I've noticed as I'm getting older is that I need to continue exercising just to maintain. Because otherwise, you're going to start losing it. If you don't use it in the physical sense, you're going to start losing it. And it will take more effort just to retain your strength when you age. But the brain, once again, is not prone to this aging naturally. And if you're very bright when you were young, you will be very bright when you're old if you take care of your brain. And you will still have that very sharp brain. Now, there's many modifiable risk factors for dementia, but I'm going to mention two of them that are non-modifiable. And the two risk factors that are there, not enough to cause it by itself, but it does increase it if you have other risk factors on board. Those two non-modifiable risk factors are your age and being a female. Females are twice as likely to develop dementia than males are. And we don't know all of the reasons for that. Of course, females live longer as well, but even if you take the same age of a male and a female, you are going to see more female decline in memory in general than you will in males. But what are modifiable risk factors? These are well established in the scientific literature. If you have diabetes or prediabetes, and yes, genetics loads the gun there, so we can't do anything about the gene, but it's lifestyle that pulls the trigger. You can have the gene for type 2 diabetes and never develop it if you are on an ideal lifestyle. And if you never develop diabetes or prediabetes, you won't have any of the risk factor for dementia. And so if you find out, and this is why every dementia patient, I'm looking at their metabolism, I'm looking to see if they have prediabetes or diabetes. What do you think is going to be the case if I find that this person is a prediabetic? What's the first thing I'm going to do to put them on? Anyone want to guess? Well, the typical physician would do that. The answer was metformin. It's a drug for diabetes. Actually, there's something that works better than metformin. And it's not only diet, but exercise. Exercise is a key ingredient. Exercise works like insulin, putting the nutrition into the cell instead of the sugar staying out in the bloodstream. The reason why the sugars are high is because it's not getting into the cells to work. And so exercise will help with that. So physical exercise is a key part. And for a diabetic, I'm going to recommend cardiophysical exercises, in other words, aerobic, repetitive exercises like brisk walking or swimming or bicycling for 60 minutes a day. And we're going to recommend 7 days a week. So that will often reverse that whole metabolic syndrome and can help the memory significantly. Of course, also getting the sugar out of the diet, getting low fat, losing weight. By the way, there was a study published just 2 weeks ago. Very interesting study. If diabetics that are overweight, and most of them are, but if diabetics are overweight and they need to get down to their ideal weight, by the way, that will get rid of their diabetes often, just getting down to their ideal weight. They took a look at metformin, because metformin can actually help you lose a little bit of weight too. It has some GI side effects that help with the weight loss. And it can help control the blood sugar. So they took a look at metformin, or they took a look at even Ozempic, one of those drugs that a lot of people are trying to search out to lose weight. By the way, studies have shown if you're using Ozempic to lose weight, you've got to be on it for life. When you get off of it, all the weight comes back and all of the issues. And so there's far better ways to lose weight than trying to take that weekly Ozempic shot or however often you need to take it. And they're not told by their doctors. The doctors will say, hey, this will help control your blood sugars and it'll help you lose weight. But hardly anyone asks, how long am I going to have to take this now that I'm on it? It's a lifetime drug. So something that they did was not any drugs, and this one didn't involve exercise either. They just put them on 2 days a week, a 24-hour fast. By a 24-hour fast, they actually ate breakfast, but no other meals. Then they ate breakfast the next day. That was 24 hours, and they would do that 2 days a week, not in succession. And they did recommend that it was just a moderate-sized breakfast like they normally would eat, about 600-calorie breakfast. Then on the other 5 days a week, they would eat a healthy lunch, but then not eat in the evening. So by that 17-hour daily fast and then 2 24-hour fasts, they averaged in 3 months' time a 22-pound weight loss, and their hemoglobin A1Cs dropped to normal in the vast majority that utilize that. Far better than Ozempic, metformin, any of those things. That requires some self-control because people get hungry in the evening. But you know, after using that program, the people all said, after 2 weeks, I wasn't even hungry in the evening. My body totally went into ketosis, and I didn't even want to eat. And so it does take self-control for a while, but eventually the body adjusts over. Let's go to another one, depression. We already talked about that. Another one, obesity. I think we've talked about that to some extent. Physical inactivity, that's a risk factor. High blood pressure. High blood pressure will shrink your brain over time. A lot of times people think, hey, I don't need to take anything for my blood pressure because I don't feel bad at all due to my high blood pressure. High blood pressure is called the silent killer. You will feel bad in ways that you have no ability to reverse afterwards. So I'm going to recommend, I haven't talked to your camp nurse, but if there isn't a way for you to get your blood pressure before you leave camp meeting, just go over to the nursing department when they're not busy, and let's see what your blood pressure is. What's the ideal blood pressure for your brain? To not get worsened over time, it's less than 120/80. If it goes above 120, your brain will start to shrink with time. If it goes above 80, it will as well. And so how can we control high blood pressure? Without drugs. 80% of the time it can be cured without drugs. Well, losing weight down to your ideal weight can help. Exercise will help. Some of those same things that help diabetes help high blood pressure. By the way, if you have high blood pressure, chances are you also have metabolic syndrome. The gene for diabetes is the gene for high blood pressure, but you get the high blood pressure first. Then you get the diabetes down the road. So a lot of people with hypertension don't realize they need to treat it just like they have diabetes. The other way, additionally, that's very important is to lower your sodium chloride intake. Lower your salt intake. If you get on a 1,000 milligram sodium diet per day, it will work better than a medicine in lowering it without the side effects of those medicines. So what you want to do is if you have just mildly high blood pressure, you want to read your labels and look at calories per serving and milligrams of sodium per serving. Milligrams of sodium should be less than the calories. If it's more than the calories, if you have the gene for high blood pressure, it will raise your blood pressure. So it's a very simple formula, but if you're going to be on a very low sodium diet, then you'd want to have that be half that amount. So if it has 100 calories and it has 40 milligrams of sodium, that's good. It won't raise your blood pressure. And that's less than half of that 100-calorie aspect of things. Now, if you get into a severe case, there are some people, we say 80% of people, their blood pressure can be controlled without medicine. But then there are some that are on 3, 4, 5 medicines, and it's still not controlled. It's still high. This is dangerous for the brain. It's dangerous for your kidneys. You're going to end up killing those nephrons and kidney cells. Half of people on dialysis are there because they didn't control their blood pressure earlier in life. And a lot of them have this dementia aspect of things. So there's a place not too far away from Weimar. Come to Weimar first. That'll be healthier and happier than having to go to True North. True North is in Sacramento, and True North is the highest, what should I say, concentration of specialists, and their specialty is prolonged water fasting. So you have to have a medically supervised water fast, but anyone with hard-to-treat high blood pressure, if they fast long enough on a water fast, medically supervised, their high blood pressure will go away. But interestingly, it'll go away about a day or two before they would die of starvation. So the high blood pressure is high every day, high as they're on this water fast. Then eventually it drops. Wow, it's 110/60. It's time to start feeding them. And of course, the specialty of prolonged water fasting is also involved in how to refeed, because a lot of people die when they start eating again, when their bodies aren't used to eating as well. But when you start the refeeding, the high blood pressure doesn't come back, and it stays like a young person's blood pressure. So that's for more of the extreme high blood pressure cases, and that's why I say New Start is a much happier place to be than those prolonged water fasts, because that will help well over 80% of the time. Smoking is also a risk factor for Alzheimer's, and then if you add all those up, just those 6 things, over 500,000 cases per year of dementia would be preventable in the United States. And those are all preventable illnesses once we know and get to the root cause of them. So let's go through some of those risk factors. We'll have to go through this more quickly here. These are risk factors for memory loss. Become a high school dropout. Studies show that if you dropped out of school early, your risk of dementia is significantly higher as you age. There's an education protection, particularly when you've been properly educated. So if you have a college degree, it actually lowers your risk of dementia, even if those compared to a high school degree. So become as educated as you can, and I would recommend that if you don't have a high school or college education, be self-educated or take courses like we have this afternoon on how to get certified to run a depression and anxiety recovery course. We don't look at your high school diploma. You can get certified and learn how to do those sorts of things, and just being a lifelong learner can help prevent dementia. So don't graduate from college, become a dropout. And also studies show that when you come home in the evening and you watch TV, you are increasing your risk of dementia. Being a couch potato significantly increases your risk. And so watching a lot of TV and using screens hours per day, you're on your phone, you are increasing your risk of dementia. And this is where we get into digital dementia, even in those that are 30 that can't seem to remember anything anymore. You know, interestingly, a lot of these 20 and 30-year-olds that have digital dementia are not even worried about it. Just like the elderly with dementia that don't seem to be worried that they've lost all of this memory. And why aren't they worried? They'll tell me this: well, yeah, I know my memory's terrible, but if I need to know it, I can look it up. It's called the Google effect. And they think that anything they need to know, they can just look up on Google and know it. Here's the problem with this. The problem with it is they can be easily manipulated. Because if you don't know true and accurate facts, and Google tells you something that's outlandish, if you have a good stock memory, you're going to recognize, wait a minute, I know what I've learned is true, and what Google is saying here doesn't make sense. It's not true. And the other thing is, it's actually easier to remember 2 things than it is 1 when they are connected. And Google just is isolated facts that are out there. And so learning through non-screen activities or non-distracting activities can be very helpful. Also, constantly chatting, texting, looking things up, checking your phone for the latest information, almost constantly, or being a YouTuber, or even pornography. These have all been shown to be significant risk factors for memory loss. And then, if you're not fit, that is also. So couch potatoes obviously are not fit, but you don't have to be a couch potato to be unfit. So I would recommend, no matter what your fitness level is, have a goal to become fit. Then there's a sex factor as well. Studies have shown this very clearly. If you look at the fine print there, if you're having sex more than every 4 days, or if you're having non-PVI sex, PVI sex has been, that's the term that Stuart Brody, a big sex researcher at University of California, San Diego, he talks about PVI, which stands for penile vaginal intercourse. Penile vaginal intercourse is the only type of sex that actually is healthy for your brain if you're not doing it too frequently and if you are totally committed to your partner, where you've gone to the marriage table. Other forms of sex are actually not good for our brain, and they will actually lead to more challenges in a lot of ways, particularly in the dopamine pathways and other ways. And so this is critically important. And masturbation, he states, is always unhealthy for the brain. Always unhealthy. And you know, we're living in a society today that's actually encouraging it. I would imagine in Canada, as woke as you guys are here, that you have school books that will actually teach kids how to do this in the public school system. Maybe not, I don't know. But I know in some sections of America that's happened. And this is actually accelerating their significant mental health issues and also accelerating their memory and their decline, and also their success in a lot of different areas of life. You know, when I grew up, fortunately, you know, I feel sorry for the younger generation that's naive, that's growing up learning from these technology devices where a lot of these deceptions are put in there. You know, I don't know if you know about it, but if you want to, you know, see on some of the divisions in our country, and even the divisions in elections, the primary divisive thing is sexual freedom versus not sexual freedom. And if people believe in sexual freedom, that it's okay to have sex however you want to, whenever you want to, whoever you want to, as long as it's consensual, that's the sexual freedom crowd. And we know where that leads. There's been a lot of studies to show that will collapse your society within 3 generations. And it's going to cause all sorts of issues, all sorts of problems. But then you have the other group, and of course that group that's into the sexual freedom group wants to have abortions and all that, because abortion wouldn't be an issue if we were just talking about married people who are totally committed to themselves getting pregnant. Those people, you know, don't just make a decision for themselves to abort, per se, but it's the casual sex crowd that is having those issues. And so they're not wanting to be bothered due to their selfishness or other reasons for this. And so you have the abortion issue, you have all those type of issues. But those who are against sexual freedom, and by the way, our country in America, every state had laws against adultery. That was the issue. We weren't enforcing those laws, and then we got the cat out of the bag, and then we have the abortion aspect of things. But it's actually sex the way God intended it that's going to be helping our brains significantly, will be a barrier against depression and anxiety and dopamine levels, etc. And also even memory has been mentioned. So another risk factor is not memorizing anything. And we have a society today, a younger society, that's not memorizing anything due to what I mentioned earlier. But I would say it's actually more important for this group that I'm speaking with today. It's more important for you to memorize your weekly memory text out of your Sabbath school lesson than it is your 8-year-old primary grandchild. And so I would encourage you to try to memorize those 13 texts of the Sabbath school lesson. Get your mind on something where you're utilizing it for memory. It actually does help our memories significantly over time. Also, eating a lot of sugar will diminish memory over time. Eating high cholesterol foods with saturated fat increases the vascular dementia significantly, but also may increase Alzheimer's. And if you become overweight and even obese, that is a significant risk factor. We mentioned it earlier. Eating lots of salt, of course, that would increase your risk of high blood pressure or developing depression, high blood pressure, diabetes, and then smoking. So we'd mentioned some of those earlier. So if we stay on a pattern where we're not participating in these modifiable risk factors, what a difference it will make. But I'm seeing patients who are already having memory issues. And so when we diagnose the memory issue, we then begin a workup. And this is what we will do as part of that workup. We're going to check their blood pressure. We're going to check their lipids, their cholesterol. By the way, studies have shown too, if you take someone's high cholesterol that has early dementia and you get it down to 100 plus their age or less, their dementia will not accelerate unless there's other causes there. So getting that cholesterol down, getting that blood pressure down, it's very key to preserving that brain and not getting it worse over time. Then metabolic things, the comprehensive metabolic profile, CBC, magnesium, thyroid testing can have a role to play. Inflammation, these are inflammatory markers. If there's inflammatory markers up, there's certain things that we're going to do to help that inflammation. Dementia can be due to an inflammatory disease of the brain. Vitamin D levels can have a role to play. B12 levels can have a role to play. Folate levels, homocysteine. We want to see the homocysteine down to less than 8 if we can get it there. The whole blood histamine, that's different. Yet I don't think you do whole blood histamines in Canada. I've not been able to get the Canadians to be able to access this anywhere up here that I'm aware of. They'll do serum histamines, but not whole blood histamine. Serum histamines are a lot easier to run, but the whole blood histamine, the blood has to be frozen on contact. It has to be specially handled. And if you have a too high or too low whole blood histamine, you will be at an increased risk of dementia. And that has to do with your methylation pattern. Are you over-methylating? Are you under-methylating? And then taking a look at your copper, and particularly your free copper. Years ago, they thought aluminum was the issue. No, aluminum comes in afterwards, after the plaque is already formed. So aluminum doesn't seem to be the risk factor, but copper, too high a copper is a risk factor. And there's a lot of literature being written on too high a copper being an issue in developing dementia. And so we'll often see early dementia people that 40% free coppers, and they need to get their copper down by using zinc and some B vitamins. What are some other things that can help? Anthocyanins have been shown to be helpful. And one of the things I've appreciated in the cafeteria this year is I'm seeing blueberries. I imagine those that came from Canada. Today I didn't eat it in the cafeteria. I had some good friends supply us a nice, healthy meal, and they had all of these blueberries. And the anthocyanins have been shown to actually go to the memory portion of your brain. I hesitate to tell you how we know that, but I'm thinking an audience like this, I can tell you. They actually have found out from autopsies from auto accidents. If someone dies from an auto accident an hour after they ate blueberries, when they look in the brain, they will see the blue pigment of the blueberries right around the hippocampus in the memory portion of the brain. And Harvard showed that if you just eat a bowl of blueberries once a week, you will lower your risk of dementia dramatically. So just once a week is healthy. Now for strawberries, you need to eat that twice a week. But strawberries are also helpful. So the anthocyanins do cross the blood-brain barrier. And as mentioned, they go to the learning and memory portions. And it improves memory. It's been shown to improve memory in older adults. The skin of Concord grapes also has anthocyanins. And it's been shown to improve verbal learning. So you're much more likely to remember what someone is speaking to you about. They even did a nice study, a randomized placebo-controlled trial. And this is where the purists will try to criticize what you're saying in regards to nutrition and lifestyle, because so many nutrition and lifestyle factors can't have a placebo control. You know, what's your placebo for thinking you're exercising when you're actually not, for instance? You know, you can't have really a placebo for that simulates exercise where you're not getting that there. And so there's a lot of things in nutrition and lifestyle where we can't develop that perfect placebo where it looks like and tastes like and does everything else like the actual thing. But they did with Concord grape juice. And what was their placebo? It was grape Kool-Aid. And it was measured for the taste, so they tasted, you know, pretty much the same, so you didn't know which one you were getting. And they found out those on the juice, compared to the grape Kool-Aid mix to match the taste, there was significant benefit in memory in those with the Concord grape juice. It also increased neural activation in the cortical regions. That's where the mitochondria is at in the brain, and enhanced that area as well. So the Harvard study, nurses population study, showed blueberries and strawberries improved memory and decreased cognitive decline in older women. This was a study on 100,000 nurses. And it actually improved their memory to where it was 2.5 years earlier. And as mentioned, 1 serving a week of blueberries and 2 servings a week of strawberries. There's also something called wild blueberry. Interestingly, the blueberries that are smaller have even better effects. So these huckleberries and these wild blueberries even have a better effect. They have Vaccinatum angustifolium A, and we also utilize a mix that's also from a French grape that has been shown to be significantly beneficial. And we have recently put this in a supplement since we treat so many memory issues in both children and adults. What is the memory issue in children? It's ADHD. You know, that wasn't in the top 4, but ADHD is probably going to be there in the top 4 because of their distractibility. They're not able to learn. But this mix increased 36% cognitive performance 90 minutes after it was consumed. And so your cognition improved immediately as it was getting into the brain. 2/3 of students had improved focus and concentration just 90 minutes after consumption. And these are young people with ADHD. In the elderly, it improved long-term memory to 10 years younger after being supplemented by it for just 6 months. Short-term memory improved by 60%, and accuracy, working memory, and attention improved by 39%. And it also prevented amyloid beta deposition, that's what occurs in Alzheimer's disease, and decreased the inflammation. So this is pretty key. As mentioned, we have formulated that ingredient with a couple of other things that I'll mention in a supplement that our team came out with called Focus, is the name of it. And it's amazing to hear the comments back on what's happening just in a few days and sometimes even a few hours for those consuming this, and it's all natural ingredients. High cholesterol. Patients with major depression tend to have significantly higher cholesterol levels than healthy adults. I think I mentioned this earlier. And so I won't go through the cholesterol in foods here, but we want to get the cholesterol down to less than 100 plus your age. And so a plant-based diet will go a long ways in getting that cholesterol out, and we don't have to worry about the oxidized cholesterol. We mentioned this the other day. The most harmful cholesterol mixes are custards or ice cream, pancakes, and Parmesan cheese was tied with lard as being the fourth most damaging. Interestingly, we shouldn't be surprised about this. The book Ministry of Healing told us about this some time ago. Here's a quote that the Lord showed Ellen White. Especially harmful are the what? Custards and puddings in which milk, eggs, and sugar are the chief ingredients. The free use of milk and sugar together, she said, should be avoided. But yet many people are mixing these two together and heavily oxidizing things and getting their self at risk for coronary disease, strokes, and vascular dementia. I will mention this. Ansel Keys said, "You tell me what you eat, and I will tell you what your cholesterol is." And with frightening accuracy, he was able to predict people's cholesterol, not just on the cholesterol they were eating, but the amount of saturated fat they were eating. Saturated fat is not cholesterol, but it increases the liver's production of cholesterol. And polyunsaturated fat, if it's twice as much as saturated fat, will actually lower your cholesterol. We talked about the nuts that lower it the other day. But high saturated fat in the diet will be equivalent to about 6 years of brain aging. This is one of the reasons somebody asked me today, who was married to a prominent health and medical person, but someone mentioned or asked me a question today as I was going around campus. What about the vegan cheeses? You know what those vegan cheeses are primarily made out of? Many of them are coconut oil. Coconut oil is as saturated as butter. And so it's also going to significantly increase your cholesterol level. Now, there are some vegan cheeses that are much better, that have more favorable P/S ratios, but most of them that I have found is maybe you won't get the cholesterol in it. That's an advantage. If there's no cholesterol, you don't have to worry about oxidized cholesterol, but it can dramatically increase your cholesterol level and increase your risk of dementia. 6 years is a big thing there, and that was saturated fat, not the cholesterol. 65% greater odds of worse global and verbal memory in the high saturated fat. So let's take a look at some of the foods. Beef and lunch meats, notice the P/S ratio is 0.09. That is very saturated. Once again, you want to have your P/S ratio greater than 2 to lower your cholesterol if it's high. So beef not only has cholesterol, but it's very saturated fat. Cheese, 0.09, very saturated, will raise your cholesterol. Milk will raise it. Butter will raise it. Bacon, deer, and lamb, a little bit better, but still far less than even 1. This is why the world recommends chicken and turkey. Its P/S ratio is a little better than those other foods. But I've run into people that don't understand this at all. And they'll see their cholesterol level, they'll come back 3 months later and they'll say, "Dr. Nedley, I got my cholesterol checked again. It's still super high and I've been eating all the chicken and turkey I can stand. What's going on here?" And I'll say, "No, you're not going to lower it that much." They might have lowered it 6 points by doing this, but you're not going to lower it much till you get to P/S ratios greater than 2. Even the average fish is the best you can get with an animal food. It's about 1.8, but even fish will raise your cholesterol level if you're a plant-based eater. But notice here the coconut oil. Notice how saturated it is, 0.01. Palm oil, very saturated. Pistachios, better than chicken and turkey, but its P/S ratio will still raise it. Filberts will raise it, Brazil nuts will raise it, but almonds will lower it. Almonds 2.2, pecans 3. Pecans will lower it even more than almonds. Hickory nuts will lower it even a little more. And English walnuts will lower your cholesterol a lot. Just a handful of English walnuts can be very helpful in lowering your cholesterol. But there is a nut that will lower it even more than English walnuts. And it's the best food for your lowering your cholesterol. Better than a statin, but it's hard to find. Black walnuts with a P/S ratio greater than 10. So we want to get that cholesterol down to not only avoid the dementia, but particularly treat it in its early stages. Then there's another herbal preparation called bacopa. It's one of the best studied nootropic herbs available, has been the subject of numerous positive human clinical trials, the majority of which have been randomized, double-blind, and placebo-controlled, over 500 articles in the peer-reviewed literature about this bacopa plant. And here's a summary of these studies. It improves memory acquisition and retention among middle-aged and senior adults. It improves delayed recall memory and reaction time among seniors. It improves spatial working memory, accuracy in healthy volunteers. And it improves verbal memory among middle-aged and senior adults. It increases learning rate and information processing speed among healthy adults that are even college age up to age 60, 18 to 60. And it improves mental control, logical memory, and learning in people with age-associated memory impairment. So when they're diagnosed with, quotes, age-associated memory impairment, this is one of the ways of really helping them. And you can see all of those studies there, randomized controlled trials. It was even done in less than 18-year-olds, down to 4 that had ADHD. And it helped manage the symptoms of ADHD in children, enhancing self-control and attention while reducing their restlessness. I've gotten questions this week, what can we do for our ADHD kids that are on Concerta and other such things? It boosts learning and memory in children requiring an individual education plan. 93% improvement in restlessness in kids. 89% improvement in self-control, 79% improvement in learning problems, 52% improvement in psychiatric problems, and a 26% improvement in logical verbal memory, 23% improvement in working memory and short-term verbal memory, and even improvement in visual memory, but a little less than the verbal memory. Another agent that's been shown to be helpful for Alzheimer's is saffron. Saffron worked as well as the leading drug in treating Alzheimer's without the side effects. The leading drug, of course, is Aricept. It goes by other different names. But saffron was better, and it seemed to inhibit the amyloid beta protein development, which the leading drug does not. The problem with it is it's the most expensive spice sold. 50,000 flowers, enough to fill a football field to produce a single pound of spice. And saffron, 30 milligrams daily, not only helps your memory, but it was equivalent to Prozac, the most common drug for depression. One of the most common, maybe sertraline is more common now, but Prozac, 20 milligrams daily in 6 weeks was equivalent to saffron, 30 milligrams daily in improving depression scales, but no sexual side effects with the saffron as there is with the Prozac. And it also improved premenstrual syndrome better than the Prozac. Even smelling it helps, so it's those red stems that are particularly healthy. Then a plant-based diet by itself has been shown to improve things. Why were vegetarians significantly less depressed, anxious, and stressed than even healthy meat eaters in the study? Negligible arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is a pro-inflammatory mediator that's going to accelerate things like vascular dementia and Alzheimer's. And we don't get arachidonic acid from plant foods. If we do find inflammation, however, we're going to recommend treating it with omega-3. Omega-3 is a natural anti-inflammatory. These are the foods that are highest in it. You notice at the bottom, flaxseed and chia seeds, walnuts, hemp seed, those are the top 4. But tofu also has it. Notice kale has even more than spinach. Broccoli is also a good source, even more than spinach. Whole wheat is going to have some omega-3 as well as oatmeal. And then vitamin C's also have been shown to be helpful. And you can see the foods that are highest in it. Guavas are very high, acerola cherries higher yet. And the red and yellow bell peppers are also very high in vitamin C. Kiwi, broccoli, and strawberries also pretty good. And of course, we're aware of oranges, which show up on the list, but there's a lot of foods that are even better than oranges. Zinc is effective as an antidepressant alone or in addition to SSRI and TCA medications. 2 weeks of zinc supplementation increases HT1 and HT2 receptors and also improves symptoms of ADHD. So zinc in food, notice the hemp seeds are up there near the top, baked beans, this is where your legumes are very healthy, adzuka beans, even tofu is a good source of zinc, as are katchung beans and large white beans. One of the things that zinc also helps out with is it lowers your copper levels, and too much copper, as I mentioned, is also an issue in regards to both depression and loss of memory over time. Now, one of the things that, this was also a recent study, I think it came out 3 weeks ago. They took a look at the third of Americans who take multivitamins and compared them with the 2/3 that don't take multivitamins. Which group lived longer? They actually were almost identical, but there was a 4% advantage in those who did not take multivitamins. And of course, they asked the question, what's going on here? I thought people need these nutrients. You know what's going on? People are taking nutrients they don't need. And one of those nutrients that's almost present in a lot of multivitamins is copper. We don't need more copper. Copper can accelerate a lot of health issues. The other thing you don't need, if you're not reproductive and you're not pregnant, female, you don't need iron. Iron is a pro-oxidant. It will accelerate your demise. It increases your risk of heart disease and cancer in excess. And so people are just taking these multivitamins by these companies. They don't even know what they're short in. If you are short in something, then go ahead and take it. If it's an herbal preparation like bacopa or saffron, that's a lot safer than giving you nutrients in certain high-packed vitamin containers that you don't even need. Too much of a good thing is not healthy. But zinc is one of those minerals you can't seem to get enough of. And there's a lot of studies. There's no problems with zinc toxicity as long as you don't lower the copper too much. So we need to have a little copper, but not too much copper. But as long as you're not lowering the copper, all the problems of zinc toxicity are actually due to copper deficiency. So it's interesting, the National Institutes of Health came out with an official position that was kind of an amazing position. Diet and lifestyle interventions do not definitely prevent or treat Alzheimer's disease. And they say, why? We need large, longitudinal, placebo-controlled randomized trials. So they put up a standard that can never be met because they're looking at the pharmaceutical standard. And of course, that's false. There's all sorts of trials showing significant benefit, even in things like bacopa, et cetera. But yet, they are still back in the dark ages, as it were, of science because they think the only thing scientific is a randomized placebo-controlled trial. They don't understand epidemiology. They don't understand a lot of other ways in which we can do studies and show benefits. By the way, traumatic brain injury also increases your risk of dementia later on. So football players, boxers, Muhammad Ali, these people are very high risk. Those that do UFC fighting, I can't even watch UFC fighting. Within 15 minutes, one or both fighters, 1 out of 3 chance, one or both fighters will have a concussion, and that concussion can cause serious problems. They need anti-inflammatories after that. They need a lot more omega-3. They also need infrared light. So other issues and supplements that can be helpful, getting zinc, B6, P5P, and biotin for excess copper, L-tyrosine or N-acetyl L-tyrosine that we have in our supplement Focus can help ADHD. DMAE can increase choline. Lavella helps with anxiety-related dementia or test anxiety. That comes from the lavender oil plant. Plant-based DHA, that's an omega-3 long chain, has been shown to be helpful, as is N-acetylcysteine, which is an antioxidant. So notice what this peer-reviewed trial said in contrast to the NIH. It is time to realize that the ultimate study of lifestyle and cognitive health and aging simply cannot be done. The absence of definitive evidence should not restrict physicians from making reasonable recommendations based on the evidence that is available. And one of those big evidences is intermittent fasting. This is one of the most protective things that you can do to your brain. If you're able to maintain your weight and not eat supper, it's one of the healthiest things you can do. It increases BDNF. It helps your brain stay young. Dr. Scharfenberg, who you might have here next year, I don't know, but if Dr. Scharfenberg comes here next year, he will tell you about his secret versus his family's. All of his family, they lived a long time. They died in their 80s, but nobody lived as long as he did. But he said, I was the only one who religiously would never eat suppers. It was his 100th birthday, and there was a celebration by some secular nutritionists in the area that invited Scharfenberg for his 100th birthday celebration, and he came over there, and they fed him this great plant-based supper, but he would not eat it. It was past his eating time. And he said, I'm 100 years old, I'm not going to start eating suppers now. And so he would not eat that evening meal. The other thing that he talked about that was different from his family is that he was outside a lot. Near infrared light outside actually penetrates our skull and helps the cortical areas of our brain maintain themselves. And so this is not vitamin D related, it's actually non-vitamin D related. You can get infrared from sunup to sundown being outside, but it's very protective of his brain. And he said when he was in his 50s, he relentlessly went outside to attend to his fruit trees and his gardens and all of those things. And now the evidence is all showing that this is one of the ways in protecting the brain as well. Violin lessons strike a chord with Alzheimer's patients. This was a very interesting study where Alzheimer's patients were actually taught for the first time to learn to play the violin. And they found out they actually could. It took them longer, etc., but with persistent teaching of a good violin teacher, the Alzheimer's patients began to learn to play the violin. They also had a nice control group where those were just listening to violin music. And they found the patients in the intervention group were capable of learning the violin. Those learning the violin demonstrated improved abilities in relation to everyday tasks, such as remembering names and faces. One patient recalled the name of a nurse she'd long forgotten. She'd had the same nurse for 10 years, but could never remember the nurse's name. But after just 3 weeks of learning to play the violin, she greeted the nurse one morning by her name. Patients who received violin lessons showed observable improvements in mood, memory, and cognition. So I want you to learn some things new. This is why coming to camp meeting is actually good for your brain as well, where you're learning these new things. But also learning a new skill can be also helpful for the brain. I'll close with a couple of cases. This was a significant one. This happened last year. This man, who was the president of a conference and was a successful church worker, he was not from this country, but in his younger years, he went through a massive genocide in his country where his wife and all 7 of their children were killed. So a significant trauma in his life. Only he and his sister survived from his family. After that was over with, he remarried and had 4 children to his second wife, became the chief executive officer of the conference, which is the conference president, but noticed his memory declining at age 72. And by age 74, it was forced retirement. Significant memory issues. He also was diagnosed with neuropathy, could no longer even carry out home responsibilities. He was placed on the drug in his country called Aricept, which is the leading drug that's used here. He would get lost in his own house. His wife noted behavioral changes of increased irritability, anger, non-cooperative. And his sister did something I think was highly dangerous. I wouldn't have recommended it at all. I didn't know it was happening. I knew we had set up an appointment for this man, but I didn't know how he was going to get here. And she didn't have money, so she stuck him on an airplane to come to Weimar with this dementia. Of course, he got lost in an airport where he had to change planes. He wasn't even sure why he was in the airport or where he was going. But finally, flight attendants and others helped him to eventually come to Weimar. But he came there late, and they almost had to send him back. But his sister got involved and said, no, please send him over there. That's where he needs to go. So, and there it is. He got lost in Brussels, lost his passport even, almost went to jail. But he was sent to Sacramento, and he didn't even know where he was. So, and he had even forgotten how many children he had when I interviewed him. He stayed with a friend that he no longer recognized. That was the friend that the sister lined up for him to stay with at Weimar, one of our professors. The friend had to show him multiple times how to use the shower in the house. Didn't know how to use it. Well, when we checked him, high blood pressure. Is that an issue? Absolutely. 145 or 94. He had headaches. He scored with severe major depression on our Beck Depression Inventory. He also had a high BMI, a body mass index, obesity at 34. But he had actually lost 50 pounds as a result of his dementia recently. But he was still obese. We did the memory test, and he couldn't even complete it. So the MCI memory test, 0. That was the worst we had ever seen in an MCI memory test. So with his high blood pressure, I put him on a low-sodium diet, plant-based. He was put on Opti-3, which has the EPA DHA. That can back up your memory to the way it was 6 months earlier. We put him on an antioxidant called NAC. And we put him on saffron, which, as we mentioned, is better than the leading drug, although we continued his Aricept. Until his diet was to work, we wanted to get his blood pressure down, so we put him on lisinopril daily. And I said, once your blood pressure is less than 105/70, then we can stop that. And we told him to exercise, and his friend was willing to get out there with brisk walking, working up to 4 miles per day in the morning in sunlight and fresh air. His labs came back. Hemoglobin A1C 5.8, bingo, pre-metabolic syndrome. His calcium was low, 8.5. His B12 was somewhat low at 227, but not severely low. His homocysteine elevated to 18. His vitamin D was down to 14. His CRP and SED rate significantly elevated. CRP should be less than 1, SED rate less than 6. His whole blood histamine was actually in the overmethylation stage, and his serum copper to zinc ratio was over 2 to 1. We want those to be more equal. And his free copper was 32%. So copper was also an issue. And his cryptopyrroles were also high, which is a sign of short-term memory as well and linked to short-term memory. Well, in the follow-up visit, he was now starting to have knee pain. Why? He was walking. Exercise. He had osteoarthritis. Of this 60 minutes of cardio exercise daily. We put him on vitamin D, a megadose for 5 doses every other day, then 5,000 units maintenance. We put him on calcium citrate to raise his calcium and 2,000 micrograms of the healthiest B12 you can get, which is hydroxycobalamin. And we changed his cow's milk that he would drink every day to soy milk or rice milk or water. We continued the low-sodium diet, but also took him off of sugar. Then we put him on this supplement called Focus. that has the bacopa and the grape skins and the N-acetyl L-tyrosine, as well as DMAE, which he needed for his overmethylation. We put him on a supplement called Brain, which has the zinc and the B6 to bring that copper level down, and we gradually increase that. And because of his knee pain, we put him on the best natural anti-inflammatory for knee osteoarthritis called Boswellia, which is also Indian frankincense, 400 milligrams twice a day. We continued the Opti-3 and the NAC and the saffron that we had started earlier. So within a month, his memory was coming back, pretty amazingly so. And by 3 months, agitation gone, anger gone, very cooperative, fully able to take care of himself, now able to exercise with no pain around the loop without even his friend helping him. His headaches that he came with were gone, and his memory started to get better before he left Weimar, but even doing better than when he left Weimar at the 3-month follow-up. Able to fully function again, and he's exercising daily and staying on his supplements and diet. This is an example of what can occur with one of the most severe dementia cases that you would be able to measure with an MCI memory test of 0. But when we get to the root cause and we start reversing those root cause issues, it's amazing what can happen with the brain when it comes back. And so I see I have gone over my limit. I thought I was going to be able to have questions today, but I'm sorry, I was going to tell you another case. But I've already talked too much about Dr. Scharfenberg, so we'll leave this for later. I do promise that tomorrow I will take questions. So, turmeric, yes, that was case number 2. Case number 2, I was going to show you what turmeric can do to an aging brain as well. Turmeric is high in antioxidants. I recommend that instead of the curcumin. And because of all the antioxidant potential, and that could also reverse. About 1,000 milligrams a day of turmeric can be helpful. In his case, we didn't need the turmeric based on having, going with other ways of doing that. And so I hope this is helpful to you all, and I look forward to your questions tomorrow, my last day with you. God bless you, and let's close with a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you that you are interested in our minds and our health of our bodies, minds, and soul. We know it's not your plan for these brains to deteriorate and go through Alzheimer's or vascular dementia or even digital dementia. I pray that everyone here would not only be able to retain this information, but tactfully share it with others and also apply it in their own lives so that their brains might remain sharp throughout their entire life. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.